Hey, good morning to those of you out there on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast with me. Um, in today's training, we're going to be talking about what to do after you submit an RFI response to a federal agency. There are a lot of folks I talk to, right? I've been training thousands of small businesses over the last 5 years. And I hear this often that we're writing RFIs, et cetera. Some people are saying, hey, we're writing a ton of RFIs and we're getting them out there, but we're not really hearing anything back, right? Or perhaps we're doing what I call fire and forget. You write an RFI response and that's it. That's all you do. And you wait for the government to come back and hand you a pile of money, right? Or it sits in your pipeline. You're like, you know what? I don't actually know what happened to that RFI. Or you find out the RFI turned into an RFP, turned into an award. You were never even part of the process, right? And so that's that fire and forget. Or for some of us, and this almost is worse than fire and forget, is that we write RFI responses back to federal agencies, and then we think we're following up, right? And what I mean by that is we write an RFI response, and every few weeks we reach out to the person we sent it to and say, hey, any change? And whether we hear from them or not, we then go on another couple of weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, and we try to follow back up, and we think we're following up. That's not following up, right? That's occasionally sending a message or something, but it's not following up. And we really want to make sure we're following up on RFI. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's training, about what to do after you submit an RFI. So I'm going to cover down on 4 different topics in today's training. First is just why we submit RFI responses. It's really important to understand why we're doing that and put things in context. The next one is what happens when you submit an RFI response. What happens in particular from the government side? What are they doing with it? Number 3, I want to cover down on our steps you can take to turn that RFI into a win, right? That's the whole reason you're really submitting an RFI is because you want a contract. You're not going to get it every single time, but there's steps you can take that will increase the likelihood of that happening. And then the last thing I want to give you a tip on is how to mind map around an RFI, right? I call this like a full court press. And so I'll talk about that in a minute, but that activity will also contribute to you increasing the likelihood of getting a win out of an RFI. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If you don't know who I am, my name is McDonnell. I want to welcome you to my federal sales training, where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market. And since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. When we understand the process is A to Z, we're going to have repeatable, predictable results when we follow that process. That's what I want for you to have, is a process and the repeatable, predictable success for your company. One thing I want you to keep in mind is that we're not government affiliated in any way. We're self-funded, meaning me primarily, right? I'm committed to sit there and change the industry based on my experiences as a small business owner. But we're also supported by sustaining members, and I want to thank sustaining members. Today, I just want to highlight Crystal Richards and say thank you for being a sustaining member. She helps people become better project managers. So go check out her LinkedIn profile. Maybe somebody will throw that into the chat. Maybe Crystal's here today. But thank you to our sustaining members, and today, in particular, Crystal. If you haven't done so already, do me a favor, in the chat, put your core competency, 2 or 3 words. Help buyers remember who you are. Make it easy for me to remember who you are so that I can make referrals whenever I get a chance, or introductions whenever I can. And then also let the people in the chat know who you are. We're easily going to have over 100 people here live today. And I want you to remember that this is your community. You're here for training, but that's just part of it. You have a community that you can network and engage in, find people, take them offline, begin to build separate relationships from this training. But that starts with you letting us know that you exist and who you are. One thing to keep in mind, if you're not connected with me already on LinkedIn, please just send me a connection request. If you're in the GovCon space, if you throw me a little message saying, hey, great training or something, I'll automatically connect with you. This is in particular something I want to just say to our YouTube friends. Yes, I love YouTube, but come on over here, because over here we can make introductions. We just can't do that on YouTube. And then subscribe to our GovCon newsletter. We're going to be at 10,000 subscribers, hopefully by the end of this month, which is just an incredible community that we have built up. And so I'd love to have you subscribe to the newsletter. An example of what I put out is this morning, I just put out 11 different trainings related to women-owned small businesses. And so I want you to go take a look at it. I talk about how the government is doing a horrible job at really engaging women-owned small businesses, but who cares? Here's what we can do to increase our success as women-owned small businesses. I'm just one of you today. Oh, I forgot this. Don't forget tomorrow we got training. So tomorrow's Friday the 27th, and we've got the 6 phrases successful government contractors say all the time. So I'd love to have you come in and attend that training. It's a perfect way to have a Friday spent. So let's dive into understanding, when we think about RFIs and what to do after an RFI is submitted, we really need to understand why we're submitting RFIs. Why are we doing it in the first place? I would say from a high level, it's because we want contracts, right? We're submitting an RFI because we want a contract. But some of the benefits that come to us from the industry perspective, right? If you're a small business, you're responding to an RFI, you get visibility with the federal buyer. Until you sent that RFI response, they didn't know who you were. People buy from those they know, like, and trust, right? And so until you sent it to them, they didn't even know who you were, theoretically, right? Unless you've been coming at them from a different angle, they didn't know who you are. But now you wrote an RFI and you have visibility to them. They know you. When they read your RFI and it's a great RFI, they begin to trust you and like you, right? But first, it begins with getting to know you. The second reason it's important for us to be sending responses to RFIs is that it's a chance for us to influence the government in the direction they're going. If you understand the acquisition life cycle, you'll understand that at certain points, they're really trying to understand the technical requirements, and then they're covering down on the acquisition approach. How are we going to buy this product or service? And so when you send an RFI to the government, you have a chance to influence those technical requirements through whatever you're sharing and the rationale of why you're saying what you're saying. It's awesome. And same thing with the acquisition approach. You have this ability to influence that. The next one, from an industry perspective of why it's valuable to send an RFI response out, is that you get on what I call a permanent guest list, right? So I describe this all the time, that the number one market research tool for the federal market is DSBS. You need to make sure you're visible in there, highly visible. But before they ever go there, they look at incumbents who are currently serving their agency. Then they look at people who have submitted responses to RFPs and RFIs. And if you've submitted an RFP or an RFI response, you're on their guest list, especially if they like the response, but they weren't able to award to you. You're in this list, and everybody does it different. Every contracting shop and every contracting officer does it a little differently, but basically they've got their eyes on the industry partners who actually look like they could help the agency, because that's where they want to go back to. So you want to get on that permanent guest list. Harvey Mackay, he wrote this book called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And I love this book because the whole idea makes sense in the title. Dig your well before you're thirsty, not after you're thirsty, right? It's way harder. And it's the same thing with trying to build relationships with federal agency buyers. You want to build those relationships before you really need to engage them. And so if you're responding to RFIs, and I don't mean in every agency, but say you want to go into the Navy and you're responding to RFIs pretty consistently in the Navy in your space, then you're going to dig your well. You're going to build those relationships before they're needed. So from our perspective, or industry's perspective, that's why we want to be submitting RFIs. From the government's perspective, and again, I'm not trying to state this from the FAR's perspective. This is from my perspective, my experience, and especially from a senior sales guy's perspective, right? Why the buyers want to do RFIs and sources sought, and why they want to get them. It's one of the main reasons is so that program offices, right, the people who have the need, can engage industry. They can begin to understand the requirements as they're trying to flesh them out internally and understand them. And then they can begin to define those requirements into a statement of objectives, statement of work, or PWS, the requirement document. They need to get that tight. And by engaging with industry, they can get it tight. They can avoid some mistakes. They can think about different options they want, et cetera. So one is the program office engaging with industry, and the other is the acquisition shop. So the acquisition shop, one of the reasons they're reaching out with RFIs or sources sought, and I'm using them interchangeable, I get it, is the acquisition shop is trying to make a determination on their acquisition approach. Everything is not set at the beginning of an opportunity or requirement the government has. They go through this entire life cycle, and every single opportunity, our word, right? Every single opportunity, decisions are being made. What's the acquisition approach we have? And so an example is set aside. Should we set this aside to women-owned small business or small business in general? Or should we go full and open? What contract vehicle should we be on? One of my favorite ways of trying to look at, and I put this a little bit in the wrong place, but influencing federal buyers is the past performance. Sometimes an RFP comes out and says you must have 3 past performances as a prime in order to go after this. Well, in that market research phase, RFI, sources sought, et cetera, That's the time for you to try to get in there and convince the contracting officer, the customer, hey, why don't you just say 2 with the prime and 1 with the sub? Because we have really strong relationships with our subs. We've been working for years with other businesses, small and large, that are successful in the federal market. How about you allow us to use 1 sub? And if you can make the rationale, it's up to the contracting officer on what they do. So, having that ability to have those discussions around the acquisition approach is a reason for getting those RFIs coming out. So you sent an RFI to the government and they get it, but you don't know what happens, right? It goes into a black box and you don't know what's happening in there. Well, it pretty much is a basic activity. And again, here, I want to talk about it from my perspective, how I see it. And the reason I'm saying it from my perspective is because when I see it from a salesperson's perspective, I can then align activity I can do. I don't sit there and go, well, I can't do anything about it. So I need to know what they're doing. So the first thing that happens when you send an RFI response generally is it goes to the acquisition shop, right? The actual acquisition team looks at it and they review it. And they go, hey, we put this out, we're looking for this, and we got it back. So you're talking about the contracting officer, the contracting specialist, anybody else from the acquisition or contracting shop who's looking at it, as well as, if you're lucky, the small business professionals who are being engaged into that. Some agencies do a horrible job. They don't really engage their small business professional. That's more like a, hey, you're getting ready to retire job, and so they give it to them. But other agencies actively engage the small business professional. Help us reach industry. We really want to find out which small businesses out there can support our mission, our need. And so the small business professional might be looking at that as well. So that's from the acquisition side of the house. But also the program office team looks at it. In particular, they're looking at it if it's an RFI where it's a discussion around the scope and the work, the requirements, et cetera. And so they might be looking at it thinking, hey, this response that we got, do these people who just wrote to us, does this response communicate a technical proficiency by that company who just responded? So they're gauging us on how technically proficient we are and how technically proficient our response is. That's first, right? First, it's a compliance type check. And then the second thing is, well, are they saying anything interesting, right? And if you're writing an RFI response the way I recommend it for the win, then you're going to write something interesting. You want them to be thinking. You don't want them to just go check, 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 done. Because theoretically, every one of your competitors is doing check, 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 done. You want them to go check, check, wait, what's this? That's interesting, right? And that interesting thing is where you sit there and say, I know you were talking about going this direction, but consider going this direction. Or I didn't see you mention this, but you might consider mentioning this for this reason, which will lead to this benefit, right? That's something interesting. And if it's really compelling and interesting, then you want, when they're reviewing it, especially the program office, that's the one you really are trying to grab, is you want them to say, oh my gosh, we got to get these people in here. Hey, contracting shop, can you set up a meeting? Can we get these people in here? Can we just talk to them more about the requirements? That happens all the time, right? Let me rephrase that. It doesn't happen all the time, but that happens all the time, right? So it's not like it can't happen to you. But the way it happens is when you write that compelling, persuasive response, you're writing for a win with your responses. And so the last thing I put here is that just as it relates to what happens when you send an RFI response, it goes into their system. And this goes back to that idea of getting on their permanent guest list, right? It goes into their system. And so other people might be able to look at it. Maybe another contracting officer in the same shop has a similar need, and they look back and they go, oh, hey, let's take a look at some of these responses and see if they're important. You're on their radar, right? Every shop and every contracting officer is different. When I supported the VA, one of the best lines I ever heard as it related to the VA is, when you've seen one VA hospital, you've seen one VA hospital. The idea should be when you see one VA hospital, you've seen all VA hospitals, but that's not the case. 150 hospitals, 150 different ways of doing it. And contracting shops are the same way. Of course, they have the FAR. Of course, they have rules and guidelines they follow, but every shop does it their own way. Every person does it their own way. And by the way you know that is when you call some contracting officers and they won't talk to you at all during market research. Oh, can't do that. And you talk to the other ones and go, yeah, of course, we're supposed to engage industry. Everybody does a little different, and that's totally cool. Okay, let's talk about how can you turn an RFI into a win, right? So here's some steps for how to turn an RFI into a win. By the way, if you haven't watched my training before, don't worry. First off, you can watch it on replay and slow it down to half speed. And second, I'm really trying to provide fast tips. So find them as I go into these next 2 slides. I'm really trying to provide tactical tips for you to follow starting today, right? That you can start implementing. So one of the things to keep in mind about turning an RFI into a win is that you must pursue it relentlessly. This is capture. RFI is a major step in the capture process of an opportunity that's in your pipeline, right? Sometimes your capture process begins because you saw an opportunity in FPDS or you saw an opportunity in the forecast. But this is a really good step to start on an opportunity, or partway into an opportunity, when they have an RFI that you can respond to. If you respond to it, pursue it relentlessly. I wrote here, for those of you who can't see, it's like, I want us to agree, can we agree, that you should not write an RFI? Don't write an RFI is my recommendation, unless two things. One, you plan to pursue that opportunity. There's no reason for you to just write an RFI response, fire and forget, like it's over there. It's like, oh yeah, we write a lot of RFI responses. Don't bother. It's a waste of your time. It's not a huge waste of the government's time if you provide them any little tidbit of value, but it's guaranteed a waste of your time to write RFI responses that aren't going anywhere, right? So only write responses that you're going to pursue that opportunity. Then the second thing is, make sure that RFIs are related to your core competency. Don't write RFI responses unless it's related to your core competency. It is solidly in your core competency, let's say SharePoint, or it's related Microsoft 365, or maybe even cloud type stuff. That's related. Construction, when you're a SharePoint company, is not related, right? So don't just be writing a ton of RFIs for the sake of writing RFIs. Write them for a purpose. Their job is to help you push an opportunity through the pipeline so that you can win. We only write RFIs so that we can win a contract. All right, so a next step I want you to pay attention to when you want to turn an RFI into the win is make sure when you write the RFI, you're getting that fully into your sales pipeline. And I'm okay if you're using a spreadsheet. You better be using a spreadsheet. But I'm okay if you're just using a spreadsheet. You'll advance to more mature tools as you go along. But get it into the pipeline and then create tasks, capture tasks that you can begin to execute on that opportunity. The idea of capture, moving an opportunity through the sales pipeline, is to identify an opportunity. Well, you just wrote an RFI response, right? You've solidly identified it, and you've provided a solution. If you're writing to the win, you've provided at least a rudimentary solution to their rudimentary requirements. Well, that needs to go into your pipeline, and you need to understand, what are we going to do to bring this home? How are we going to bring this home to a win? That's capture, right? If you don't do that, you're not doing capture and you're not doing sales, you're doing quotes. You're hearing about an opportunity, you're writing a proposal, which is a glorified quote. But in the middle, if you don't do capture, then you're missing out on your ability to really beat out your competition. So the second thing I want you to pay attention to as it relates to this in turning an RFI into a win is to get meetings with anybody who can support your ability to go after it. Anybody can support the pursuit, the capture pursuit activities that you'll be doing. And I'll talk about it on the next slide of who you want to connect with, but get these meetings, get in, have conversations. You want to have conversations with as many people as you can so you can turn their implied needs into explicit needs. This is a very classic sales responsibility. When you're doing sales, your job is to help a customer turn implied needs, I think I need this, into explicit needs. I need it, right? So an example is, if my brakes are making noise, I think I need brakes, but I can take them or leave them, blah, blah, blah. But if I get to the stop sign, I push my brake pedal and I keep on going through, I now have an explicit need for brakes, right? And so my job as a salesperson is to raise an implied need up to an explicit need. Using this brake example as a way to do this, I might sit there and talk to somebody who's got squeaky brakes and go, well, what if your kids win the car and that's the day the squeaky brakes became no working brakes? Do you want to wait until they're not working and your kids are hurt? Or do you want to sit there and address it now so that you never take a chance with your kids? Let's get you those brakes, right? That's transactional sale. That's really fast, but it's the same thing we do in the government world, right? You just do it over a long period of time, over many meetings. You're trying to turn something implied, some pain, some need, some goal into an explicit. We must have zero trust architecture. We must have elevators that are safe. And of course they're all safe, but safer or something like that. So anyways, turn implied needs and explicit needs through the capture activities you're doing. And that's coming all the way back to, if you submit an RFI response, make sure you plan to pursue that opportunity and then pursue it relentlessly. Okay, So let's talk about, I mentioned have all these meetings, right? Get in there, talk to them about turning an implied need into an explicit need. Let's talk about who those people are, right? Who do you who do you reach out to? I didn't have time or space to be able to show you this, but when I work with my customers and I'm helping them think about capture, I always use mind maps. I love mind maps. When I am on the back of my board here, you can see behind me, everything I kind of do is a mind map. And really, just to make sure everybody understands what a mind map is, it's taking some topic and putting it in the middle and beginning to have legs coming off of that, or spokes coming off of it. And I could have a spoke coming off, and then there's spokes coming off that spoke. That's mind map. You're getting out the organization. Well, I do the same thing when I have an RFI. I'll put an RFI in the middle of a mind map. So I'll document this in my sales pipeline tool. But when I'm thinking about it, I'm really trying to drive it forward. I'll put the RFI in the middle, and I'll start trying to think about that RFI from a people perspective. Who are all the possible people I can reach out to, try to have a meeting with, et cetera, to influence that opportunity? And so the first thing I do is I put the RFI in the middle, and I have 3 spokes that come off. I say, here's the contracting shop or the acquisition shop, right? Here's program office personnel, and here's the OZBU. First thing I do when I'm putting those 3 on is I want to know the name. Is this the 76th contracting brigade? Something like that, right? Is this the PEO digital shop or something? I want to know the names. I don't want to just casually know contract, program, whatever. I want to make sure that I've even identified that much detail, because then I can begin to find the right people. So as you see that I've got laid here, the next step that I follow is I start trying to find people under the contracting shop, under the program office shop, and under the small business shop. And I'll talk about that in a second. So let's just think about who I might reach out to and begin to make calls, right? When I work sales, or when I teach our customers how to do this themselves, we talk about how do you find these people. First off, how do you even know who you want to find? And then how do you find their names, numbers, and emails? And so the first group of people I would want to find around an RFI are the acquisition related people, like the contracting officer, the contracting specialist, right? If you don't know this, the contracting officer is the focus of power. They're the only ones who are going to sign a contract over to your company. Nobody else will. And so you need to know who is the contracting officer. You need to try to get in there and influence them. And the best influencer to the contracting officer is the contract specialist if they're working together on opportunities. Especially as opportunities get bigger, there's more and more people in that. But the contracting specialist tends to do a lot of industry engagement type stuff and work with that contracting officer. So you want to know the contract specialist. Then I put in more. And this is stuff that you might hear people in the government go, wow, don't go that path. Don't listen to them. I'm a sales guy telling you how to do sales. Don't listen to the buyer telling you how to do sales. So an example of some other people you really want to be paying attention to is, who's the head of contracting for that office? This is the top person. So when I look at Customs and Border Protection, for example, I'll go in and go, well, who's the head of contracting? It's important. You want to be able to potentially meet with them, but certainly know who they are. You can follow them on LinkedIn, whatever it is. There's supervisors of contracting officers, right? So you got contracting officers, you got their boss. Who's their boss? If you begin to know that, the more of this information you know, the more chance you're going to be able to win that opportunity, because the more information you're going to be able to gather. And so the same thing going with the head of contracting activity is there might be division chiefs or branch chiefs. So for example, I was looking at Army Contracting Command for a customer, and we got them into the division chiefs to be able to have meetings and to be able to introduce themselves. And when they did, they were able to have real conversations. And under those division chiefs are multiple contracting officers. So understanding who these people are, even if you don't have a conversation with the head of contracting activity, knowing who they are means you're doing the work to find the right people. So that's the acquisition shop, contracting shop. Program office, it's something very similar, right? The structure. So you want to, look at the top. What is that program office and how is it organized, right? So if it's PEO digital that I mentioned, then there's a program executive officer and a deputy. I didn't put them in here, but a deputy program executive officer. And the deputy tends to be responsible for industry engagement, in particular with small businesses. So you want to know who those people are. You want to know who the CIO is and the CFO. I was just looking at inside of Commerce at a couple of agencies in there, and we were identifying the CIOs. And then from that, you're able to then identify the division chiefs or branch chiefs underneath those departments, right? You begin to understand these people. If the RFI is here and the program office is here, who are the people in there? These are people who might be able to tell me some information and share information. These are people who might review the proposal when I submit it. Keep in mind, the reason large businesses hire retirees coming out of the Navy or coming out of the government is because they go right back in and they know people. More than anything else, they know people. And so that's what you want to do. That same thing that they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for, you can do it yourself by just doing what we teach as targeting and outreach. Understand who to talk to. So then project managers, program managers, there's all sorts of different titles, but you don't want to just settle on one person. If I'm looking at your pipeline, let's say I'm head of sales for your company, I want to see 5 people listed. It's like, well, Neil, I barely can find one. Work harder. I say that very softly, but if you can't find 5 people, there's a really good chance that our competitor is finding 5 people. Our competitor might be the incumbent, or they might be inside the agency, and all they have to do is walk to the hallway and see 5 people, right? So there definitely are 5 people. It just takes work to get it done. I understand that. That's why we teach the 7-step process. That's why I work with customers to help them execute on that. But you can do this stuff if you follow what I teach. And the last one I put on the program office was the contracting officer representative of the core. We just did this yesterday with another small agency where we were able to identify 3 cores, and they actually work in the program office world, and they just have the responsibility of being what we call a contracting officer representative. So they're able to talk basically technical back to the contracting officer. Anyways, when you find them, and if you're able to get in to have a meeting, then you're going to learn a ton about that organization, that program office. When you want to write a response, that response, Julia Fletcher just wrote a post today, and she was talking about win themes and what you need to know in order to have a really strong proposal with a win theme. And basically, she was saying you need to talk to these people and ask them what they think and feel. And if you can get that out of them, then you can write really strong winning proposals. All right, so the last group of people on this page about who should you be putting on that mind map and who should you be tracking, it's the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization folks. It's the Office of Small Business Programs for the military. This top shop, you want to identify the OSDBU. They're not going to really help you on this opportunity, but if you can't get traction on the opportunity, if you can't get people to respond, then you can call the OSDBU and ask them to help you. And many of these folks will. But they don't know about that opportunity. So they're not going to be helpful on the opportunity, but they'll be helpful on nudging people forward. And then the small business professional, the title is different, but basically that's small business specialist. And then SBA has these procurement center representatives. These people are vital if you're a bigger company who goes after bigger opportunities, because these are the people who say, no, you're not going to put that to full and open. That should go small. Basically, that's their job, right? And so they do oversight on agencies to make sure opportunities that could go small do go small. And if you're responding to an RFI that's larger, 25, 50 million or something, you want to make sure these people know that you're interested and you've got other small businesses that can do the work. All right, moving at a fire hose pace, I just want you to remember this as you're going away to the rest of your day. If you respond, make sure you pursue relentlessly. Go after it, go for the win. Learn everyone possible, identify everyone possible who can help you somehow shape that RFI into an RFP win. And then the last thing here on what I want you to remember is that RFIs mean capture. It doesn't mean fire and forget. So when you submit an RFI, there are tasks you want to get done. If you're interested in working with me, go ahead and check out govconchamber.com. You can learn more how we can accelerate your business. But for everybody, remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next training.